Alkander's Almanac of all things. Alkander's Almanac of all things. Okay, I think I got it. This video is sponsored by Alkander's Almanac of This video is sponsored by Alkander's Almanac of All Things, a modular 5th edition game expansion which builds on top of your rules for combat, exploration, social encounters, and lets you customize your game any way you see fit. So thank you so much for bringing us here to talk about this horrific dragon monster. We're going to talk a little bit more about our sponsor later on in the video, but for now, if you want to check out that Kickstarter, the link is in the description below. Tell them that Dungeon Dad sent you and give them a little kiss for me. Bonjour et bienvenue dans un autre Monster of the Week, the show where we dig up old creatures from past editions of D&D and other tabletop games, and then convert them into 5th edition stat blocks that you can use in your current D&D 5e campaigns. My name is Josiah, also known as Dungeon Dad, and we're currently going through a wild heat wave, so I figured what better way to cool off than with something chill, something relaxed. Something that can breathe giant cones of frozen air. That's right, we are talking about white dragons today, but not just any white dragon. See, the Frostforged Wyrm is a little bit different. The Frostforged Wyrm might start out its life as a typical white dragon, however, through one way or another, it has found itself, unfortunately, in the Abyss, where the demons who live there have taken it upon themselves to improve the dragon. Of course, by improve, I mean climb all over it and nail steel spikes into it, basically covering its body with giant plates of armor. But armor isn't the only thing that's changed about this creature. Its entire demeanor, the way that they fight, as well as some of its abilities even have changed by that abyssal magic which has seeped its way into the dragon. These creatures are cruel in their creation and cruel in their methods on the battlefield, so today we're going to do what we do, which is talk about exactly where this creature came from, and we're also going to talk about how to use it in combat. But most importantly, we're also going to talk about some plot hooks and ways that you can actually employ this creature in your campaign. As always, I have done a full 5th edition conversion of this monster, so if you want to follow along or check it out after, you can find the stat block in the description below this video in the form of a Google document. Now then, let's try and see the bard seduce this thing and move on to some... So as I mentioned before, the Frostforged Wyrm started out its life as a regular white dragon. That's the creature that we're essentially basing this stat block off of. So you're going to see a lot of the abilities and damage and modifiers look pretty much the same. You know what a white dragon is, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but it still has those claw and tail attacks, it can still breathe its cone of cold breath, all that good stuff. In talking about the Frostforged Wyrm, I'm mostly going to focus on what was changed as it underwent this demonic transformation. The first thing, which is going to be obvious, is that its armor class is higher. I mean, dragon scales are already pretty tough, but hey, there's like an inch or two of steel on top of them, so he's gonna be harder to hit. The next thing that's changed requires a little bit of a flavorful explanation here. See, the Frostforged Wyrm did not become this abomination by its own volition. This creature has basically been turned into a weapon of war, and its pain and agony, which causes it to get into a state of near madness while undergoing this process, is truly an attestation to where its abilities have ended up. For example, its Frightful Presence ability, it still has, but it doesn't control who that targets anymore. Frightful Presence usually targets a wide area of creatures as chosen by the dragon. In this case, it's just affecting everyone around it because this thing is lashing out and kind of going wild. Secondly, it can no longer pause to take a moment to try to detect where its opponents are with a legendary action. It still has legendary actions, but it can't use Detect anymore. However, now it does have access to an action called Pain Frenzy, which uses all 3 of its legendary actions and basically just hits every creature within 10 feet of it. They do get to make a dexterity saving throw for half damage, but this is a very dangerous ability, which is why it can only do it once per round. However, the biggest, most monumental change, and why I even suggest using this monster, is an ability which I have named Infernal Lash. I didn't really have a name before, so I just made one up. The way that this works is any demon that is within 5 feet of a Frostforged Wyrm is able to use its action to drive one of those metal spikes into the creature's body, causing a great pang of pain to go through the dragon. This does cause the dragon to take a d10 of damage, so it's hurting it. But it also allows the dragon to use its reaction to make a melee attack against any creature that it can hit. So this means that as long as the dragon is accompanied by other demons, and they can even be tiny little bastards that are just crawling on its body, it's able to basically make an extra attack every round as a reaction just for free. I mean, it's not really free, it is costing it up to 10 hit points, but still, that's a big deal. As far as actually fighting this thing, it's not going to use the same tactics dragons typically use, you know, taking to the skies, using that height advantage, hit and run tactics, making itself hard to pin down. All of that is out the window. The Frostforged Wyrm is driven to near madness by what it's undergone, so it is going to be lashing out and just charging at everything within its path. The fate that has befallen this creature is actually quite horrific, and that should be represented by the way it's acting and the way that it's fighting. Also, I should mention that is one drawback to all these extra metal plates in its body is that all of its speeds for walking, burrowing, or flying have all been cut down a little bit because it's so weighed down now. So it's not going to be running from its enemies, it's going to be charging in and trying to kill them along with everything else in its path as quickly as possible. Honestly, that pretty much sums up the changes, mechanically at least, and how this creature is going to fight versus a regular dragon and kind of the tactics it will use. So now we're going to take a look at how you can actually employ this monster in your games, and I think there's a lot of really interesting applications for a Frostforged Wyrm in any campaign that wants to get into some more intense and heavy topics. So with that said, let's take a moment and talk about some... So the very first thing we need to acknowledge when it comes to the Frostforged Wyrm is that this is a creature that is in constant pain. It is truly a tortured monster, and while many of the chromatic dragons are quite evil in nature anyways, nothing deserves to be treated the way that this thing has been treated by literal demons. Let's say you set up the villain of your campaign as a powerful white dragon. Players might not know this, but the dragon is actually working on behalf of some demon lord trying to advance this grand scheme on the material plane. There might be little hints and clues alluding to that with the players, but they don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. All they know is that this white dragon has been wreaking havoc, so that's what they gotta do. They gotta go take care of this bad guy. And perhaps along the way, before the big grand encounter happens, the players are doing the things that adventurers do and dissuading the dragon's plans at every turn, just ruining everything for the bad guys. This, of course, means that the white dragon might fall out of the graces with its demon lord master, and perhaps as punishment, it is ripped into the abyss and this terrible fate is enacted upon this dragon. So when your players finally get there and expect this big encounter with this kind of mastermind dragon who's been pulling the strings from behind the scenes, instead, they're greeted with this act of brutal savagery and a tough fight to be sure, but not necessarily the one they were expecting. This is a great way to kind of open up your campaign to a much broader spectrum where, you know, you're kind of at low to mid tier. This dragon is the ultimate bad guy, and your players encounter him maybe around level 10 or 11, and then suddenly it's like, oh, the world is much bigger and much more dangerous than we initially realized, and there are things at play here that we are not prepared to deal with. Thus, the campaign continues into its next act with this demon lord now installed as the big grand villain. And whether you're in that scenario or using this monster in a different way entirely, there's also the option for mercy. If your players choose not to kill this dragon, who by all rights is probably a terrible person, they might find themselves an unlikely ally, or at the very least be able to negotiate some type of peace between this monster and the lands that it was otherwise dominating. Because at the end of the day, a Frostforged Wyrm is nothing but a tool to the demon lord who commands it. And rest assured, this isn't a random act of violence. There's always a demon lord who commands its lesser demons to do something like this to another creature. And speaking of demonic subordinates, That's also something you need to consider, is what type of demon you want to pair with a Frostforged Wyrm, because it's very rare that the party would encounter this monster just by itself. It's almost always going to be driven like a brutal war beast by demons. Maybe you have all kinds of little demons swarming on its body, and whenever it takes like certain thresholds of damage, they start to fall off and kind of join the encounter. Or if you're playing at like crazy high level tiers of play, perhaps the Frostforged Wyrm is a sort of companion to some great giant archdemon that's using it as basically an attack dog. This creature really shines in that it can be used to show your players how devastatingly evil the demons from the abyss can be. Adventurers are sure to encounter all manner of horrors on the road, but when you take a creature like a chromatic dragon, which is known for being powerful and known for being merciless and evil, and subjected to this kind of torment, only to have it turned back on the players, it forces you to look at its masters and say, wow, like we thought this dragon was evil, that dude is an asshole. All in all, I think the Frostforged Wyrm is a really interesting creature and can provide a bit of a spin on your typical dragon encounter, both in terms of flavor and context, as well as its slightly different abilities and tweaked both positive and negative stats. In any case, hopefully you found this video interesting, and if you do want to use this creature, as I said, the stat block is in the description below there, which is in a Google document that contains everything you will need to run this creature successfully. And of course, if you are one of my lovely patrons, you can find the kind of monster manual style fancy stat block with the art and stuff over on the Patreon page, the link to which is also in the description below. Also, again, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Alkander's Almanac of All Things. Nailed it that time. This is a really interesting product that you can find on Kickstarter now. I'm super excited about it. It's basically a modular rule set that will allow you to change up the game pretty much any way you see fit. And I mean, yes, we can already add and customize things, but this book has done all the work for you. It even comes with suggestions about how to tweak the rule changes listed in the book. So whether you're trying to go for grimdark fantasy filled with blood and intensity, or you're trying to get that Teletubbies game off the ground that you've been talking to your friends about for the past 10 years, there will be something for you in this book that will help you improve your DM style and also make prep a little bit easier. There are ultimate rules and suggestions to make combat faster, to make combat more fun, to make combat more interactive. There are rules to make your interactions more interactive. There are rules for exploration. Huh. Imagine that. If that sounds like something you are even remotely interested in, please take a look at the link in the description there and check it out. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Until then.